He had spent years believing the world forgot him. But deep inside that mountain, something had been waiting for him all along. Ethan Caldwell stood beside his old pickup truck as the desert morning stretched across the empty land. The air was dry, the wind was quiet, and the mountains in the distance looked like they were holding secrets that no one had discovered in years. For most people, the rocky landscape was just another forgotten corner of Arizona. For Ethan, it was the only place where he could breathe without feeling like the world was watching him. Ethan was 56 years old, a former U.S. Marine who once knew exactly where he belonged. He had worn a uniform, followed a purpose, and believed his future had a clear path. But after leaving the service, life slowly changed. Friends moved on. Old routines disappeared. The confidence he once carried became harder to find. Eventually, Ethan ended up living out of his aging pickup truck, carrying only what he needed and trying to survive one day at a time. Many people saw a homeless veteran. They saw the worn clothes, the old truck, and the tired expression on his face. They did not see the years of dedication behind him. They did not see the kindness he still offered to strangers. The only one who never looked at Ethan differently was Ranger. The German Shepherd walked beside him through every difficult morning and every quiet night. Ranger did not care about what Ethan had lost. He only knew that Ethan was his family. One afternoon, while searching for a place to escape a sudden desert storm, Ethan followed a narrow path along the mountain ridge. The trail was barely visible, covered by dust and small stones. He would have turned back if Ranger had not suddenly stopped. The German Shepherd stood perfectly still, looking toward a section of rock that seemed no different from the rest of the mountain. Ethan watched him carefully. "What did you find, boy?" Ranger slowly moved closer and placed his nose near a small opening between the stones. Ethan brushed away the loose dirt and discovered something unusual. Behind the rocks was a flat surface that did not belong to the mountain. It was a door. Not a modern door. An old wooden entrance built directly into the stone. Ethan stepped back, confused. He had passed through this area before, but he had never noticed anything like it. The mountain had hidden it well. For a moment, Ethan simply stared. He felt a strange feeling he could not explain. It was not fear. It was curiosity, maybe even hope. He carefully opened the door, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper inside. The air that came out was cool and carried the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. Ranger looked back at Ethan, waiting. Ethan smiled softly. "You always find the things everyone else misses." Together, they stepped inside. The hidden house was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It was not abandoned in the way he expected. There were shelves, furniture, and personal belongings covered by years of dust. Someone had lived here. Someone had built a home inside the mountain and then disappeared. On the wall near the entrance was an old photograph frame. Ethan wiped away the dust and looked closer. The picture showed a man wearing a military uniform, standing proudly beside the same mountain. Beneath the photograph was a small metal plate with a single sentence engraved into it. "For those who were forgotten, but never lost." Ethan felt those words deeply, because for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe he had not been forgotten either. As the sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, Ethan and Ranger explored the hidden rooms. They found old letters, military items, and a locked wooden box that appeared untouched for decades. Ethan knew this was not just an abandoned house. It was a story waiting to be uncovered. And somehow, his loyal German Shepherd had found the first piece of a secret that had been hidden for years. The hidden house inside the mountain was silent, but Ethan Caldwell could feel that it was holding a story. He stood in the center of the old room, surrounded by objects that had been untouched for decades. Dust covered the wooden shelves. Faded photographs rested inside worn frames. A small table sat near the wall with a notebook carefully placed on top, as if someone expected the right person to find it one day. Ranger stayed close beside him, watching every movement with calm attention. The German Shepherd had discovered the entrance, but Ethan knew there was more waiting inside. He slowly opened the notebook. The first pages were filled with handwritten notes about people, places, and moments from the past. It was not a diary about the owner's daily life. It was something different, a collection of memories. Ethan read the first few lines and immediately noticed a pattern. The writer mentioned veterans who had struggled after returning home, men and women who had served their country but later felt forgotten by the world around them. Ethan felt a familiar feeling in his chest. He understood those words more than he wanted to admit. He turned another page and found a name written carefully at the top. Samuel Reed. Below the name was a short description. A man who carried the weight of many, but never asked anyone to carry his. Ethan paused. The sentence stayed with him. He knew what it felt like to hide struggles behind silence. He knew what it felt like to let people believe you were fine because explaining the truth felt too difficult. Ranger moved toward the corner of the room and stopped beside a wooden cabinet. Ethan followed him and noticed a small metal box hidden behind it. Inside were several old military items, including a worn dog tag and a folded letter. The letter was addressed to someone named Samuel. Ethan carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was similar to the notes in the journal. The message described a promise between friends. A promise to create a place where veterans who felt lost could find peace, support, and a reminder that they still mattered. Ethan looked around the hidden house again. This was not simply a shelter built into a mountain. It was a place created with compassion. Someone had built these rooms for people who needed somewhere to feel safe. As the afternoon light entered through a small opening in the stone wall, Ethan noticed something carved near the floor. It was the same symbol that appeared on the old dog tag, a mountain shape with a small line beneath it. He traced the carving with his fingers and wondered why someone would hide such an important place from the world. Later that day, Ethan decided to search for more information about Samuel Reed. He visited a small local library several miles away and met Emily Parker, a historian who had spent years studying forgotten stories from the region. When Ethan showed her the photograph and dog tag, her expression changed. "Where did you find this?" she asked quietly. Ethan explained about the mountain house and how Ranger discovered the entrance. Emily carefully examined the items. She told him that Samuel Reed was once known in the area as someone who helped struggling veterans. Then, one day, he disappeared from public records. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody knew why he left the house behind. Ethan looked at the photograph again. The man in the picture had the same quiet expression Ethan often saw in the mirror. A person who carried memories others could not see. Before Ethan left, Emily handed him an old newspaper article. The headline mentioned Samuel's final project before he vanished. A place built not for himself, but for people who had nowhere else to go. Ethan returned to the mountain as the sun was setting. Ranger waited beside the entrance, watching him approach. Ethan placed a hand on the German shepherd's head. "You found more than a door, Ranger." Inside the hidden house, the locked wooden box remained untouched. But now Ethan knew it was not just a mystery. It was part of a story that had been waiting years for someone to continue it. The mountain house was no longer just a hidden place to Ethan Caldwell. It had become a doorway into a story that someone had spent years protecting. Every room seemed to hold a memory. Every object seemed to carry a reason for being there. Ethan returned the next morning with Ranger by his side, carrying a small notebook and the information he had learned from Emily Parker. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted to understand why Samuel Reed built this place and why he disappeared without telling anyone. The German shepherd walked through the entrance slowly, his paws moving across the old wooden floor. Ranger stopped near the same wall where the hidden compartment had been discovered. Ethan smiled softly. "You already know this place better than I do." Inside the hidden room, Ethan continued searching through Samuel's belongings. He found old photographs of veterans sitting together, sharing meals, and talking quietly around the same wooden table. They were not pictures of important events. They were pictures of ordinary moments. Smiles, conversations, people finding comfort with others who understood their experiences. Ethan looked at those photographs for a long time. He realized Samuel had not built a house. He had built a feeling. A place where people could stop pretending they were fine. A place where they could simply be understood. While examining the old documents, Ethan discovered a list of names. Each name had a short note beside it. Some notes described personal struggles. Others mentioned small victories. Finding work. Reconnecting with family. Learning to believe in themselves again. Samuel had carefully recorded every story because he believed no person should disappear without someone remembering them. Ethan felt a quiet sadness as he read the pages. For years, he thought his own struggles made him different from everyone else. But now he saw that many people had walked through similar storms. They just carried their pain in different ways. Later that afternoon, Emily returned to the mountain house with additional information from her research. She explained that Samuel Reed once worked with a small group of veterans who wanted to create a support network. They never had a large organization. They never wanted attention. They simply helped people one person at a time. He believed a small kindness could change the direction of someone's life, Emily said. Ethan looked around the room. Those words felt familiar. They reminded him of moments when someone offered him help when he needed it most. Moments he almost forgot because they seemed so small. But maybe small moments were never actually small. As Ethan and Emily continued searching, Ranger moved toward a section of the floor near the back wall. He looked down and then back at Ethan. There was something different about his expression. Ethan carefully removed a few old wooden boards and discovered a narrow space beneath them. Inside was a small metal container wrapped in cloth. The container was old but carefully protected. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside were several letters, all sealed and arranged neatly. The first letter had Samuel's handwriting on the front. For the person who finds this place. Ethan took a deep breath before opening it. The letter was not about Samuel. It was about the person who would eventually discover the mountain house. Samuel wrote that he hoped the finder would understand one important truth. The world often overlooks people who are struggling. But being overlooked does not mean being without value. Ethan read the sentence twice. It felt as if Samuel had written those words directly for him. The man who had once slept in his truck was standing inside a home built by someone who understood loneliness. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Ethan sat outside with Ranger beside him. He looked at the hidden entrance and wondered how many years it had waited. How many people had walked past this mountain without seeing what was inside. Then he looked at his loyal companion and smiled. Ranger had not only found a hidden door. He had found a message meant for a person who thought he had been forgotten. But the final letter inside the container revealed one more mystery. Samuel had written about someone connected to Ethan's own past. Someone Ethan never expected to find mentioned inside that mountain. The letter from Samuel Reed remained open on the wooden table inside the mountain house. Ethan Caldwell read the final lines again, hoping he had misunderstood them. But the words were clear. Samuel had written about someone connected to Ethan's past. Someone whose name had not been spoken in years. Ethan sat quietly, feeling the weight of a memory he thought he had already buried. The person mentioned in the letter was his father. For a long time, Ethan believed his father's life after military service was something he would never understand. His father rarely spoke about those years. He carried his memories quietly, just like Ethan had learned to carry his own struggles. But now inside, a hidden house built into a mountain, Ethan was discovering that his father had been part of a story much larger than he ever imagined. Ranger rested beside him, sensing the change in Ethan's emotions. The German Shepherd had always known when something was different. He did not need words to understand. Ethan carefully continued reading Samuel's letter. Samuel explained that years earlier, he met Ethan's father during a difficult season of life. Both men had returned from service carrying experiences they rarely shared with others. Instead of letting those memories separate them from the world, they decided to use them to help people who felt forgotten. The mountain house became their quiet place, a place where veterans could rest, talk, and remember they still had value. Ethan looked around the room with new eyes. The old furniture, the photographs, the handwritten notes, everything connected back to a promise between two men who wanted others to feel less alone. Emily Parker arrived later that afternoon after discovering more information from local records. She brought an old newspaper clipping that mentioned Samuel and Ethan's father working together on a small community effort. The article was not famous. It was only a few paragraphs long. But to Ethan, it felt like discovering a missing piece of his own family history. "Your father never wanted recognition," Emily said softly. "People like him often do their best work quietly." Ethan looked down at the photograph of his father and Samuel standing beside the mountain house. He realized something that changed the way he viewed his past. His father had not disappeared from the world. He had simply chosen a different way to serve, not with a uniform, but with compassion. As the evening approached, Ethan and Emily continued exploring the hidden rooms. Behind a shelf of old books, they discovered another small compartment. Inside was a collection of letters written by people Samuel and Ethan's father had helped. Each letter shared a different story. One person wrote about finding hope after losing direction. Another described rebuilding relationships with family. Another simply wrote that someone finally listened. Ethan held the letters carefully. They were not valuable because of their age. They were valuable because they proved that kindness leaves traces behind. Even when people forget names, they remember how someone made them feel. Outside the mountain house, the desert wind moved across the rocks. Ethan stepped onto the entrance path with Ranger beside him. For years, he believed his own story was one of loss. He believed the things he had lost defined him. But standing there, he began to understand something different. Maybe his journey had not been about losing everything. Maybe it had been about finding what truly mattered. Ranger looked toward the mountain, then back at Ethan. The dog had discovered the hidden entrance. He had uncovered the first clues. But Ethan now understood that the greatest discovery was not inside the mountain. It was the reminder that he was still connected to something meaningful. Before leaving for the night, Emily noticed one final detail inside Samuel's documents. A map with a small mark hidden near the back of the house. It pointed to a place beneath the mountain that nobody had opened for decades. Ethan looked at Ranger. The German shepherd stood ready beside him. Another secret was waiting. And this time, it was connected to the reason Samuel and Ethan's father had hidden everything in the first place. The small mark on Samuel Reed's old map became the center of Ethan Caldwell's thoughts. For years, the mountain had stood quietly above the desert, holding memories that almost disappeared with time. Now, beneath the same stone walls, Ethan knew there was another part of the story waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, he returned with Ranger and Emily Parker. The sun was still low, casting soft golden light across the mountain path. The air was cool, and the silence around them felt different. It no longer felt empty. It felt like the mountain was carrying a message. Inside the hidden house, they followed the markings on Samuel's map. The drawing led them toward the back section of the building, where an old wooden door was covered by shelves and forgotten boxes. Ethan carefully moved the items aside. Behind them was another entrance. The door was smaller than the first one, but it had the same symbol carved into the wood. The mountain shape, the symbol of a promise. When Ethan opened it, they discovered a room that looked untouched. There were no expensive items, no treasures, only shelves filled with carefully organized records, photographs, and handwritten pages. Emily looked around with surprise. This was not a hiding place, she said quietly. It was an archive. Ethan walked closer to the shelves. Each folder contained a different story. Names, dates, memories. People who had once needed help and found it here. Samuel had documented every person who entered the mountain house, not because he wanted recognition, but because he believed every life mattered. Ranger moved slowly through the room, stopping near an old wooden cabinet. Ethan opened it and found a collection of letters tied together with a simple piece of string. The first letter was dated many years earlier. It was written by Ethan's father. Ethan's hands became still as he held the paper. He had spent years wondering what his father kept hidden. Now, he was finally seeing the truth. The letter was not about regret or sadness. It was about gratitude. His father thanked Samuel for creating a place where people could find peace after difficult times. He wrote about how important it was to remind others that their past did not define their future. Ethan read the words slowly. They felt familiar because they reflected something he had forgotten about himself. He had spent years believing his mistakes and losses were the most important parts of his story. But his father's letter showed him something different. A person could lose their way and still find a path forward. Outside the room, Emily examined more documents and discovered a pattern. The mountain house had quietly helped people for decades. Some visitors stayed for only a few days. Others returned years later to help someone else. It was never meant to be a permanent escape from life. It was meant to be a place where people could gather enough strength to continue. Ethan looked at Ranger and smiled. The German shepherd had been beside him through every discovery. He remembered the days when Ranger was the only living thing waiting for him at the end of a difficult night. The dog had never asked about his past. He had only offered loyalty. As the afternoon continued, Ethan and Emily found one final folder hidden behind the oldest records. Inside was a photograph of Samuel, Ethan's father, and another person standing near the mountain entrance. The third person was unfamiliar. Beneath the photograph was a handwritten note. The next person who finds this place must know the truth. Ethan looked at Emily. She looked back at him with curiosity. The note suggested that Samuel had expected someone to discover the house someday. Someone connected to the promise they made years ago. As the desert sky turned orange, Ethan closed the folder carefully. The mountain had already revealed more than he imagined. But the final secret was still waiting. And this time, it was not only connected to his father's past. It was connected to Ethan's future. The photograph found inside the hidden folder remained on Ethan Caldwell's mind long after the sun disappeared behind the mountains. 3 people stood together in the image. Samuel Reed, Ethan's father, and someone Ethan had never seen before. The unknown person was the missing piece of a story that had followed his family for years without him knowing. The next morning, Ethan returned to the mountain house with Ranger beside him. The German shepherd walked confidently along the familiar path, as if he already understood that another discovery was waiting. Ethan carried the old photograph carefully inside his jacket. It felt like more than a picture. It felt like a message from the past. Emily Parker arrived shortly after with additional records from the local archives. She had spent the night searching through old documents, trying to identify the third person in the photograph. When she finally found a name, she looked surprised. His name was Thomas Bennett, Emily said. He worked with Samuel and your father. The 3 of them helped create this place. Ethan looked at the photograph again. He wondered why nobody had ever mentioned Thomas. Emily explained that Thomas was not a public figure. He preferred staying behind the scenes. While Samuel was remembered as the person who created the mountain house, Thomas focused on keeping the records and protecting the stories of everyone who came through the door. Ethan realized that every person connected to this place had chosen quiet service instead of attention. Inside the archive room, they searched for more information about Thomas. Ranger moved slowly between the shelves, occasionally stopping near different boxes. Ethan noticed that the dog always seemed drawn to the items that carried the most meaning. Not because Ranger understood the details, but because he had a way of sensing when something mattered to Ethan. Near the back of the room, Ethan found a box labeled with a simple word: legacy. Inside were handwritten notes from Samuel, Thomas, and Ethan's father. The documents described their dream for the mountain house. They wanted it to become a place where people could rebuild their lives after feeling lost. Not a place that erased the past, but a place that helped people understand they were more than their hardest moments. Ethan read one of his father's notes carefully. It said, "Everyone deserves a place where they are seen." The word stayed with him. For years, Ethan had walked through the world feeling invisible. People saw his situation, but never his story. They saw a man living out of a truck, but never the years he spent serving others. They saw what he had lost, but never what he still carried inside. Later that day, Ethan and Emily discovered another section of the archive hidden behind a wooden panel. Inside were dozens of small envelopes. Each one contained a personal message from someone who had visited the mountain house. Some thanked Samuel for listening. Some thanked Ethan's father for offering encouragement when life felt impossible. Each message represented a moment when someone chose kindness instead of looking away. Ethan sat quietly as he read them. He thought about how easily people could disappear from history, not because they had no importance, but because their good deeds were often never recorded. Samuel had understood that. That was why he saved every story. As evening approached, Ethan stepped outside with Ranger and looked across the desert landscape. The mountain no longer felt like a forgotten place. It felt alive with memories. He placed his hand on Ranger's head and smiled. "You know, I spent years looking for a reason to keep going." Ranger looked up at him calmly. Maybe this was waiting for us. Before leaving, Emily returned with one final document she had found in the archives. It was written by Samuel just months before he disappeared. The first line immediately caught Ethan's attention. "If you are reading this, then the mountain has chosen the right person." Ethan looked toward the hidden house. The secret inside the mountain was becoming clearer, but the next page revealed something he never expected. Samuel had not only been protecting the past, he had been preparing someone for the future. The first line of Samuel Reed's final document stayed in Ethan Caldwell's thoughts throughout the night. "If you are reading this, then the mountain has chosen the right person." The words felt impossible to ignore. Ethan had spent years believing his life had become a series of closed doors. Now, inside a hidden house built into the mountain, he was standing in front of a door that had opened at exactly the right moment. The next morning, Ethan returned with Ranger and Emily Parker to continue reading Samuel's message. The quiet sunlight entered through the old windows, filling the room with a soft golden glow. Dust moved gently through the air, almost like tiny pieces of the past floating around them. Ethan opened the document carefully. Samuel explained that the mountain house was never meant to belong to one person. It was created as a reminder that everyone deserves a second chance. He wrote about people who arrived feeling lost and left with a renewed sense of purpose. But then Ethan reached a part of the letter that changed everything. Samuel had written about a promise he made with Ethan's father. The two men knew that one day the mountain house might be forgotten. They knew time could erase names and memories. So they created a record of every person who found hope there, believing that someday someone would continue what they started. Ethan looked down at the pages. He realized Samuel was not searching for someone wealthy or powerful. He was looking for someone who understood what it felt like to be overlooked. Someone who knew that even a forgotten person could still have something meaningful to offer. Ranger rested beside Ethan's feet as he continued reading. The German Shepherd had been there since the first moment they discovered the hidden entrance. He had found the path, the rooms, and the clues that led them deeper into the story. But Ethan understood that Ranger had found something more important than a secret. He had helped Ethan find a reason to believe again. Emily studied another section of the document and discovered a final project Samuel had planned before disappearing. He wanted the mountain house to become a place where veterans and others facing difficult seasons could come together. Not as a charity, not as a place that reminded people of their struggles, but as a place that reminded them they still had value. Ethan walked through the rooms slowly. He touched the old wooden table where people had once shared conversations. He looked at the photographs of strangers who became friends. He imagined the voices that once filled the quiet mountain walls. For the first time in years, he did not feel like an outsider looking in. He felt connected. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned to the archive room and found a small envelope hidden beneath Samuel's final document. Inside was a note written by his father. Ethan recognized the handwriting immediately. The message was short, but every word carried meaning. His father wrote that he hoped Ethan would one day discover the mountain house, not because he wanted Ethan to inherit a place, but because he wanted him to understand something important. A person's worth is never measured by what they own. It is measured by the kindness they leave behind. Ethan sat quietly after reading the note. For years, he had carried the belief that his best days were behind him. But now he wondered if maybe his story was only beginning. Outside, the desert wind moved across the mountain. Ranger stood beside him, watching the horizon. Ethan placed the note safely inside his jacket and looked back at the hidden house. The mystery was no longer about why Samuel built this place. Ethan finally understood. The mountain house was waiting for someone who needed to find it. Someone who needed to remember that they still mattered. But before they could restore the house, Emily discovered one final piece of information hidden in Samuel's records. A detail that revealed why Samuel disappeared and why he trusted Ethan to uncover the truth. The information Emily Parker discovered in Samuel Reed's records changed the way Ethan Caldwell looked at the mountain house. For days, he believed the biggest mystery was what had been hidden inside the stone walls. But now he understood there was another question that mattered more. Why had Samuel chosen to disappear, and why did he trust someone like Ethan to find this place? The answer was hidden in a final collection of documents stored deep inside the archive room. Ethan, Emily, and Ranger returned to the mountain house early in the morning. The desert was calm, with only the sound of the wind moving across the rocks. Inside, Emily carefully organized the papers while Ethan searched through Samuel's notes. Ranger stayed nearby, quietly observing as he always did. After several minutes, Ethan found a document with Samuel's name written across the top. It was not a letter. It was a record of the final days before Samuel left the mountain house. Samuel explained that he had grown older and realized the place needed someone new to continue its purpose. He did not leave because he stopped caring. He left because he believed the message was more important than the person who started it. Samuel wrote that the mountain house was never about one man. It was about every person who walked through the door and discovered they still had something valuable to give. Ethan read those words slowly. He thought about his own journey. He had spent years believing he was searching for a place to belong. But maybe he had actually been searching for a reason to belong. Emily discovered another page that connected Samuel's disappearance to a promise he made with Ethan's father. The two men agreed that the house would remain hidden until someone found it naturally. They did not want people to come looking for a reward. They wanted the person who discovered it to understand its meaning first. Ethan looked toward Ranger. The German shepherd had not followed a treasure map or searched for something valuable. He had simply noticed something others ignored. A hidden doorway. A forgotten place. A story waiting for someone willing to listen. Later that afternoon, Ethan began cleaning the mountain house. He removed years of dust from the shelves and carefully organized the old records. Emily helped preserve the documents, making sure the stories would not disappear again. For the first time in many years, the quiet rooms began to feel alive. The mountain house was becoming a home again. News of the discovery slowly reached the nearby community. People who had heard stories about Samuel began visiting. Some remembered him. Others had only heard his name from older family members. They brought photographs, letters, and memories that added new pieces to the story. Ethan listened to every person who arrived. He realized something important. Samuel had spent his life making sure others were remembered. Now Ethan was continuing that same kindness. One evening, Ethan sat outside the house with Ranger beside him. The sun painted the mountains with warm colors, and the same place that once felt empty now felt peaceful. Ethan looked at the old entrance and thought about how different his life had become. Not because he found something hidden inside a mountain, but because he found a connection he thought he had lost forever. Emily joined him and handed him one final photograph discovered among Samuel's belongings. It showed Samuel, Ethan's father, and Thomas Bennett standing outside the mountain house many years earlier. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten message. The next caretaker will not be the person who owns this place. It will be the person who understands it. Ethan read the sentence quietly. He knew what Samuel meant. The mountain house was not waiting for someone wealthy. It was not waiting for someone powerful. It was waiting for someone with compassion. As Ranger rested beside him, Ethan realized the secret hidden for all those years was never just about the house. It was about the people who needed it. And now, one final decision remained. Ethan had to decide whether he was ready to become the person Samuel had been waiting for. The morning sun rose slowly above the desert mountains, shining over the place that had once been forgotten. Ethan Caldwell stood at the entrance of the mountain house with Ranger beside him, looking at the wooden doorway that had changed the direction of his life. Months earlier, he believed he had lost everything that mattered. He thought his story was already written. A former Marine living out of an old truck. A man remembered only by what he no longer had. But standing there now, Ethan understood something he had never considered. Sometimes a person is not lost. Sometimes they are simply waiting to be found. The decision was not easy. Becoming the caretaker of Samuel Reed's mountain house meant accepting a responsibility larger than himself. It meant protecting the memories of countless people who had passed through those doors. It meant continuing a promise made long before Ethan ever knew this place existed. Ethan walked through the rooms one more time, touching the old wooden table, the shelves filled with handwritten stories, and the photographs that showed moments of kindness forgotten by time. Every corner carried a reminder that people were more than their struggles. They were fathers, mothers, friends, and survivors of difficult seasons. Ranger followed quietly behind him, just as he had done from the beginning. The German shepherd had never needed to understand every detail. He only knew one thing. Wherever Ethan went, he would be there. Emily Parker helped Ethan organize the archive and preserve the documents. Together, they created a system so every story inside the mountain house could continue to be remembered. They did not change the heart of the place. They simply protected it. Soon, people from nearby communities began visiting again. Veterans came to share memories. Families arrived with old photographs, connected to Samuel and Ethan's father. Some visitors came looking for answers. Others came simply because they heard there was a place where someone would listen. Ethan welcomed every person who entered. He understood what Samuel understood years before. Sometimes the greatest gift a person can offer is not advice or solutions. Sometimes it is simply making someone feel seen. One afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting outside the house with a group of visitors. They shared stories beneath the same mountain that had hidden Samuel's dream for so many years. Ethan looked around and realized something that surprised him. The place that once belonged to the past had become a place for new beginnings. The mountain house was no longer a secret. It was a reminder that forgotten things can still have purpose. Forgotten people can still make a difference. Forgotten dreams can still find their way back into the light. As the evening arrived, Ethan walked along the mountain path with Ranger. The desert air was calm, and the sky was filled with soft colors. He thought about the first day he found the hidden entrance. He remembered feeling uncertain, tired, and unsure if life had anything left to offer him. Now he knew the truth. The mountain did not give him a new life. It helped him discover the life that was still inside him. Ranger stopped near the old entrance and looked back toward the house. Ethan smiled. "You found this place before I ever could." The German shepherd simply stayed beside him, the same loyal companion who had never judged him by his circumstances. Years later, people would remember the mountain house as a place of hope. They would remember Samuel Reed, Ethan's father, Thomas Bennett, and everyone who helped protect its purpose. But they would also remember one more story. The story of a man who thought he had been forgotten, and a dog who showed him that some paths are hidden because they lead us exactly where we need to be. The greatest treasure inside the mountain was never something that could be owned. It was the reminder that every soul has value. Every act of kindness leaves a mark, and sometimes the smallest companion can help us find our way home.